Samuel Hargrove had always imagined his later years would carry a certain way turned, heavy with the quiet pride of a life well lived. He'd pictured himself on a porch somewhere, maybe with a dog at his feet, the kind of scene you'd find in a faded photograph. Instead, at 63, he found himself in a squat, single-story house at the end of a cul-de-sac called Willow Bend, a place where the air smelled faintly of damp grass, and the paint chosen by someone else was a muted gray that reminded him of overcast skies. It wasn't the retirement he'd envisioned when he'd left behind the rumble of 18-wheelers and the endless highways of his trucked RIVYing days. But it was his now, a sanctuary carved out of necessity, not desire. 5 years earlier, a stroke had rewritten his story. The doctors called it a cerebrovascular incident, a sterile term that didn't capture the way it had snatched his voice and left his legs unreliable. His once steady baritone, the kind that could carry a tale across a diner counter, was now a rasp, fractured and unpredictable. His hands, which had gripped steering wheels through blizzards and heat waves, trembled when he tried to hold a pen for too long. The wheelchair's sleek, motorized model with a joystick he could nudge with 2 fingers had become his lifeline, his bridge to a world that otherwise felt out of reach. It wasn't cheap. The insurance had balked, and he'd drained the last of his SAVYNGS to cover it. But it worked. It gave him the mailbox, the grocery store, the rare trip to the library. It gave him dignity, or what was left of it. Willow Bend was a neighborhood that wore its closeness like a badge, though Samuel saw through the veneer. Retirees swapped gardening tips over picket fences, young couples hosted barbecues, and single professionals jogged past with earbuds and polite smiles. They were friendly enough, in that surface way people are when they don't expect you to linger in their orbit. Samuel didn't mind. He'd never been one for small talk, even before the stroke. Now, he preferred the rhythm of his days. Coffee at 7:15, meds at 8 o'clock, mail at 11 o'clock. Routine was his anchor, and the quiet of his little gray house was his shield. That shield began to crack the day Eleanor Price took an interest in him. Eleanor lived 3 doors down in a house that seemed a Prian white, siding spotless, flower boxes blooming in perfect symmetry, a seasonal flag snapping in the breeze. She was in her late 50s, widowed, with a presence that filled any room she entered. Her voice had a lilting quality, like she was always on the verge of offering you tea, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. She was the neighborhood's unofficial overseer block party organizer, petition circulator, the woman who knew your trash pickup schedule better than you did. Her husband had passed years ago, a fact she mentioned only in passing, as if it were a detail she'd filed away with last year's tax returns. She wasn't cruel, not outwardly, but she had a way of wielding kindness like a blade, slicing through pretense to get what she wanted. Samuel first noticed her watching him months after he'd settled in. He'd be at the mailbox, the hum of his chair a soft undertone to the morning, and there she'd be watering her roses, her head tilted just so, her gaze lingering a beat too long. At first, he chalked it up to curiosity. A man in a wheelchair wasn't exactly invisible, but the glances grew more deliberate. She'd pause at the edge of his lawn, clipboard in hand, scribbling something as if she were tallying his existence. He didn't like it, but he didn't say anything. Speech was a battle he rarely won these days, and silence had become his default defense. Their first real exchange came on a crisp October morning. Samuel was maneuvering down his ramp, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves, when Eleanor approached, a canvas tote slung over her shoulder. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" she said, her tone syrupy. "Must be nice to have all this time to enjoy it." The words landed like a pebble in still water, rippling with implication. Samuel managed a nod, his throat tightening as he searched for a reply that wouldn't come. He'd worked 30 years on the road, hauling freight from coast to coast, until his body gave out. The idea that his chair, his isolation was some kind of vacation stone. She smiled, waved, and walked on, leaving him with a distinct feeling he'd been weighed and found wanting. After that, Eleanor's presence became a constant. She'd stroll past his house, pausing to adjust a birdhouse or check her phone, her eyes always flicking toward his windows. Then the rumors started filtering through the neighborhood. A man named Pete, a retired mechanic who lived across the street, mentioned it casually one day while Samuel grabbed his mail. "Eleanor's been asking about you," Pete said, scratching his beard. "Says she's seen you MOVYing around inside. Wonders if that chair's really necessary. Thinks maybe you're gaming the system." Pete shrugged, as if it were just gossip, but the words lodged in Samuel's chest like a splinter. The chair was no luxury. It was custom-built, a necessity born of medical reports and physical therapy sessions. Without it, he was trapped, unable to reach the kitchen, let alone the outside world. The suggestion that he didn't need it wasn't just wrong, it was a threat. But Samuel stayed quiet. He'd learned long ago that arguing with whispers was a losing game. Then, one November night, the chair vanished. Samuel had parked in the entryway as always, close to the door, but not blocking it. He'd checked the weather rain, coming and gone to bed, the familiar hum of its charger lulling him to sleep. He woke at dawn to an unnatural stillness. Something was missing. He swung his legs over the bed's edge, tried to stand, and crumpled to the floor, his knees buckling under him. Pain shot through his hips as he dragged himself toward the entryway, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The space where the chair should have been was empty, the charger cord dangling uselessly against the wall. Panic clawed at him. He had no phone nearby as emergency alert was on the kitchen counter 20 feet away. He crawled, inch by agonizing inch, his arms trembling, his skin scraping against the hardwood. By the time he reached the counter and hit the button, sweat stung his eyes, and his VY sound swam. The paramedics arrived 40 minutes later, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. "You sure it wasn't outside?" one asked, peering at the locked door. Samuel pointed, his throat too raw to explain. They lifted him onto a stretcher and took him to the hospital, where he spent the night hooked to monitors, his mind racing. 2 days later, a social worker called. "Good news," she said, her voice clipped. A resident turned in a wheelchair they found near the dumpster on Oak Street. Eleanor Price. He didn't need to hear more. Eleanor hadn't found it. She'd taken it. But how? The door had been locked, the windows shut. He racked his brain, replaying every moment, and landed on a fleeting memory. A repair tech had come by a week earlier to adjust the chair's battery. Samuel had stepped away for a moment, Leah VYing the door ajar. Had she slipped in then? Watched him long enough to know his habits? When he got the chair, back delivered by a volunteer from the community center, it was a mess. The joystick was loose, the seat coated in a sticky film that reeked of bleach. A staffer shrugged. "MS. Price said she cleaned it up, thought it might help someone." Samuel stared at the disassembled pieces, his hands shaking. This wasn't help. This was sabotage. He filed a report, but the police were skeptical. No signs of a break-in, an officer said, flipping through a notepad. Could be a prank, or a misunderstanding. The word grated on some misunderstanding, like stealing a man's legs, was a mix-up over a borrowed lawnmower. His caseworker, a tired woman named Clara, sighed over the phone. "It's tricky. She didn't admit to taking it from your house. Claims she found it on public property. Without proof, it's your word against hers." Then came the letter. It arrived a week later, crisp and official, from the Department of Social Services. His disability benefits were under RE-VYEW, suspended pending an investigation into reported inconsistencies in his mobility status. An anonymous complaint, though, Samuel knew exactly who'd sent it, claimed he'd been seen Eleanor Price, had set off a chain reaction that threatened to dismantle his fragile existence, seen walking without assistance on multiple occasions. The accusation was absurd, but it hit its mark. Without those benefits, he couldn't afford his meds, let alone the repairs his chair now needed. The system, meant to support him, had become a noose, tightening with every bureaucratic delay. Eleanor didn't stop there. She escalated, her tactics growing bolder, more insidious. She rallied neighbors, circulating a petition to RE-VYEW disability parking permits, cloaking her vendetta in CIVYC duty. She left flyers in mailboxes vague, but pointed warning of resource misuse by certain residents. Samuel found his trash cans tipped over one morning, the contents strewn across his lawn, a silent message. Then came the job listings, slipped into his mailbox, circled in red. Warehouse worker. Delivery driver. Jobs he couldn't do, mocking his reality. He confided in Lena Ortiz, a barista at the corner cafe, where he sometimes stopped for coffee. She was young, with a quick smile and a patience that didn't feel forced when he struggled to order. Over time, she'd become a rare ally, someone who didn't flinch at his halting speech. When he told her about Eleanor, her jaw tightened. "This isn't random," she said, her voice low. "She's trying to break you." Lena helped him fight back. They documented everything: photos of the trash, the flyers, the chair's condition. She tracked down a friend, Marcus, a paralegal who worked pro bono for a legal aid clinic. Together, they built a case, piecing together evidence of Eleanor's harassment. Marcus uncovered a detail that shifted the tide. Eleanor had used a fake title, Community Standards Liaison, on her complaint forms, a lie that skirted legality but exposed her intent. The tipping point came one foggy night when Samuel's security camera cheat model Lena had insisted he caught a figure near his shed. The footage was blurry, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Eleanor, standing motionless for 6 minutes, then slipping away. The next morning, they found a shredded envelope there, one of his benefit statements, with fraud scrawled across it in black marker. Marcus filed for a restraining order, and the judge granted it. Eleanor was barred from contacting Samuel or approaching his property. She didn't protest, but she didn't retreat either. She'd stand at her fence line, arms crossed, staring across the DV, her silence more menacing than words. The hearing was a quiet affair, held in a drab municipal office with flickering lights. Samuel, flanked by Lena and Marcus, faced a panel of 3 administrators. Eleanor sat across the room, composed, her pastel blouse a stark contrast to the gray walls. Marcus laid out the evidence of photos, timelines, the fake title, the footage. Samuel played a statement he'd recorded with Lena's help, his synthetic voice steady. "I've spent years pro-VYing, I'm not a liar. She's taken my chair, my peace, my trust. I just want to live." Eleanor countered smoothly, claiming concern for community welfare, denying everything provable. But the panel wasn't swayed. After 2 weeks, they ruled in Samuel's favor. Eleanor was censured, banned from filing complaints for 3 years, her mediator bid rejected. His benefits were restored, with back pay. The neighborhood shifted after that. No apologies came, but the stares softened. A new neighbor, a single mom named Tara, introduced Song in VY Ted Samuel to her son's birthday party. Her boy, 8 and fearless, asked about the chair. "Is it like a robot?" Samuel typed, "Better. It's mine." The kid laughed, and Samuel felt something loosen in his chest. Eleanor faded into the background, her influence waning as her allies drifted away. One evening, Samuel found a note in his mailbox, not a threat, but a scrawl from an unknown hand. "You're not alone. She's done this before." Lena traced it to a former resident who'd moved after clashing with Eleanor years ago. It wasn't closure, but it was fuel. Months later, Samuel sat on his porch, the ramp gleaming in the dusk. A breeze carried the scent of cut grass. Tara waved from her yard, her son chasing a soccer ball. The chair hummed beneath him, steady his. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't a weight. It was a gift. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.